Hey, Chuck Holton here. Welcome to the Hot Zone. In this case, it is actually pretty hot here. I'm in Cucuta, Colombia today. In the last week or so, I've gone from a very remote border crossing between Bolivia and Chile up in the high mountain desert. And now I've come back to kind of where I started covering the Venezuelan issue here on the border between Venezuela and Colombia. Now, one of the things I wanted to see coming here is I wanted to gauge how things have changed, because it's gotten progressively worse since the first time I was here in like 2016. And now I wanted to see if it's as bad as it was in 2019, the last time I was here, right before the pandemic hit. And I will say that it's probably at least as bad. There are a lot of people who just come across the bridge from Venezuela to go shopping here in Cucuta. So that's one of the reasons why it's so chaotic. There's just so much commerce happening all around here, and then people end up packing gigantic bags full of stuff back into Venezuela. And that stuff gets put on buses and gets taken deep into Venezuela, all the way to Caracas and places like that. But so this city is one of those typical chaotic border towns where there's a lot of osmotic pressure pushing people across for one reason or another. Well, one of the other reasons people come across, obviously, is to leave Venezuela. One thing that I've learned is that most of the people who had the financial wherewithal to leave Venezuela left a long time ago, and they flew out and went to places like Panama and the United States. This border crossing is for the poorest of the poor. It's where people walk for days or ride buses in Venezuela for days to get to this border crossing and walk across, and then they have to decide which way to go. Where they go from here is very dependent on a lot of factors, one of which being the foreign policy of the countries they're thinking about going to. So many of them decide to go to the United States, but as it gets more difficult to go to the US, they decide to go somewhere else. So when Trump was president, a lot of the people who came across this border ended up going to Chile or Ecuador because it was easier to get to and easier to get back from. They could make a lot more money than they do in Venezuela, where the minimum wage is about $3 a month. And if things got better, they could come back to Venezuela, or they could come back to visit their families and stuff like that. You understand that people who leave here and go to the United States, if they're seeking asylum, they cannot leave until their asylum claim is adjudicated, and that could take many years. So if they leave and go to the US, they can't go home for a visit. And that's a factor that weighs into that. Also, they worry about the crossing of the Darien Gap, which everybody knows is dangerous. And so they take all those factors into account to decide where to go. One of the factors that they have to take into account is the trail to get to wherever they're going. And right now, we just found out that Mexico will soon be instituting a visa requirement for Venezuelans coming through their country, transiting to the United States. And they did that ostensibly under pressure from the U.S. government. And that's a method of slowing down the number of migrants, because it went from like 1,600 migrants in 2020 to almost 50,000 in 2021, just from Venezuela alone. That's a huge jump, and obviously partially due to the pandemic, but not just the pandemic. It's also because of the deteriorating situation in Venezuela. Now, if you look at the numbers, Venezuela is actually doing quite a bit better financially because the price of oil and because of some deals that they made with Iran and China and Russia to buy their oil. However, I'm going to go around here and try to get away from this music. Boy, they like their noise here. Wow. So ostensibly things have gotten better in Venezuela because they're making more money now from oil. Their oil output has gone up dramatically in the last year as they've sort of gotten some parts that they needed to fix the oil refineries and pumps and that sort of thing that were broken. But the big problem that has not gone away is the corruption. There's still a tremendous amount of corruption in Venezuela, and so a large part of the increase of their oil production is going right into the hands of the corrupt politicians. You have to understand, Venezuela is a failed state. It is essentially a narco-criminal enterprise masquerading as a country. And what that means is that the benefits all go to the wealthy, to the connected, and they don't trickle down to the regular people. That's why the regular people are literally eating garbage, and even still today. So, all that brings us to Cucuta. There are more migrants right now in this city of Colombia. There are more Venezuelans than there are Cucuteños. And that's been true for a long time, but it has some pretty profound effects. The people usually come here and stay in this city just long enough to decide where they want to go and how they're going to get there. If they get too desperate, they just start walking. And I'm going to go try and see that next, where they walk sometimes 2 weeks just to get to Bogota and then take it from there. Colombia has been really good about assisting the Venezuelan migrants. They've made it so that they can work here. They've made it so that they can stay here. They've allowed literally thousands of babies to be born in their hospitals at no cost, and have given those babies Colombian citizenship so that they won't be stateless persons. So Colombia has been very generous with these migrants. There may come a day when, like before, back in the 80s, Colombians used to flee to Venezuela when it was worse here than it was there. And maybe the Colombians remember that and think maybe it'll be that way sometime again. And so they're being very generous. They say something like 2.5 million Venezuelans in Colombia right now. Could be much more than that. It's really hard to count because they can cross anywhere on this border. They don't have to have any paperwork or anything like that. And so that's where we are. I'm going to be doing some more reporting over the next day or so from here. So we'll talk about it some more, I'm sure. Thanks for watching, and thanks to all our new subscribers. If you're not supporting the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you would go to chuckholton.locals.com and at least follow me there, because I post a lot of additional content and extra stuff there that you don't see on the YouTube channel or the podcast. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'm Chuck Holton. This is The Hot Zone.